executives are there. Tim Cook from Apple. It's being held at Bill Gates' house. And they're starstruck. In fact, when President Xi enters the room, Tim Cook turns to his colleagues and says, "Did you feel the earth move?" And this is really the beginning of a courtship between Xi, the communist regime in China, and the biggest names in tech. Bill Gates, you look at Mark Zuckerberg, these are all individuals that have deep ties with communist China, and they're supportive of their policies, and these ties actually enhance the military and intelligence capabilities of China, which is now positioning itself to surpass the United States. That's their goal.
Well, let's talk about these high-tech robber barons. Why do you think they're so taken by a genocidal communist dictator like this? Isn't that odd to you? I mean, the old Soviet Union, I don't remember American corporations saddling up to Brezhnev and so forth. As a matter of fact, if you had done something like that, and you received business from the old Soviet Union, you'd be persona non grata. Here, it's in the open. They embrace this man. What do you think the mentality is?
Well, it's interesting. You look at a guy like Bill Gates, who's worth, what, $100 billion or more. Is it really about the money? It might be. Honestly, I think it has more to do with the attraction to dictatorship that a lot of these executives have in Silicon Valley. So a guy like Bill Gates, for example, with Microsoft, Microsoft does major research in China with military-linked labs in artificial intelligence, which is a crucial area that China says they're going to surpass the United States so they can achieve technological superiority. Microsoft accepts interns from the People's Liberation Army. Bill Gates himself has invested in Chinese companies that are doing military technological research with the United States. And to cap it all off, Bill Gates is an advisor to the Chinese government. He's been given membership in something called the Chinese Academy of Engineering. It sounds great, but it's actually a Chinese Communist Party-run organization whose charter requires members to be, politically approved, and their responsibility is to advise the Chinese government on technical matters. Bill Gates doesn't need the money. Why is he doing that? I think there's an attraction to the fact that in China, things get done efficiently because you've got a brutal dictatorship imposing its will on people.
And in many ways, these corporatists, that's their own mentality, right? I mean, even though you have shareholders and you have shareholder meetings and you have a board of directors really selected by the chairman and the CEO, they muscle through these shareholder meetings. They don't really reveal everything they're supposed to reveal. We call them publicly held companies, but what do we really know? We invest in a mutual fund, we have an IRA or a 401k, and we don't know what the hell Microsoft or Apple's doing with the communist Chinese. And speaking of Apple and Tim Cook, what is that relationship like with the communist Chinese government?
Well, there have been revelations about the fact that Apple has set up sweetheart deals with China in terms of supplier relationships. Tim Cook, I talk about this in the book, jokes around with Communist Party officials that are censoring content in China. You look at a guy like Mark Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg went to the state dinner that Barack Obama held for President Xi. At that dinner, Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook, goes up to Xi and says, "My wife is about to give birth to a child. Would you name that child?" Literally, that's what Mark Zuckerberg asked. Xi sort of chuckled and said, "No, that's too great a responsibility." In another situation, the top propaganda official for the Chinese Communist Party visits Facebook headquarters. Mark Zuckerberg gives him the tour. They go back to Zuckerberg's office. The Chinese Communist Party official sits in his chair and notices a thick book sitting on his desk. It's the collected writings and speeches of President Xi of China. The propagandist asks Mark Zuckerberg, "What's this book doing here?" And Mark Zuckerberg literally tells him, "Well, I've been reading it and I bought copies for the senior executives in our company so we can better understand socialism with Chinese characteristics." It's remarkable the way in which they suck up to them and the literal help that they provide in aiding and abetting this brutal regime?
I think this generation of corporatists, Peter, is quite different than a generation of corporate titans in the past, who really put a lot of muscle and smarts into building our economic system, our economic foundation, whether it's steel, whether it's oil and so forth. They were virulently pro-American patriots, World War I, World War II. They did everything they could to support the American people. Or when a president sat down with them and said, look, we need your help on something, even the turn of the last century, McKinley calls in Mellon and Carnegie and some of the others. The federal government is broke, and they lend the federal government money, the predecessor to the Federal Reserve and so forth. I don't see that today. I see these guys with lobbyists looking for every advantage they could possibly get. I see these guys coddling up to a genocidal, mass-murdering dictator while they're trashing Donald Trump and the Republican Party as some kind of socially backwards entities. There's something terribly wrong with these young people, become middle-aged people, obviously, and run these corporations. Did you find that as well?
No, I think you're spot on, Mark. I mean, that's part of the problem. They're kind of unmoored, disconnected from American life. And of course, these are, in the economic sense, the biggest winners in America. I mean, they should be the biggest cheerleaders for a representative form of government, limited government, rule by law, limited regulations, but they're not. And they seem happy to perform these services that benefit the Chinese government. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg, for example, teamed up with Google, and they said, we're going to attach this large data cable, and we're going to link Hong Kong with San Francisco. And they start building it, and they hire a Chinese company linked to the Chinese military to do it. The only reason this project was not completed was the Justice Department and the FBI stepped in and said, no, you cannot complete this project because it would provide unprecedented, in their words, opportunities for Chinese espionage. Now, Mark Zuckerberg and the people at Facebook and Google know that. These are very, very smart people. What would prompt them to think it was okay, in the name of a dollar, in the name of building their corporation, to provide this benefit to the Chinese government is beyond me. And you're right, a generation earlier, you would not have seen corporate executives willing to do something like that.
And also look at their own conduct. Facebook, you talk about Zuckerberg and the internet and so forth. They don't tolerate different opinions. They don't even tolerate experts coming on their sites, talking about vaccines. They don't tolerate intelligent, substantive disagreements with what this administration is doing, or Fauci, or anything of the sort. They're picking up some very, very bad habits from communist China and the way that regime is ruled. Don't you think?
Yeah, that's a crucial point, Mark, because here's the thing. The argument has been made by Silicon Valley and Wall Street and others that if we have this commerce with communist China, our values are going to rub off on them. Well, that certainly hasn't happened. What has happened, however, is Chinese Communist Party values have rubbed off on them. And so you find Microsoft, you find Facebook, you find Google executives making excuses for Chinese censorship, pretending it's not occurring, or sort of saying, oh, it's not that big a deal, when in fact they're starting and have been doing the same thing here in the United States. So you see this merging in the tech space. We have this technological World Wide Web that sort of exists, that sort of links everything together. The censorship approach and attitude that Beijing has perfected over the course of the last 15 years or so is now being imported into the United States, and it's not being done by the American government. It's being done by these tech giants, and it ought to frighten anybody who's concerned about freedom of speech.
Well, we have created these oligopolies within the United States, which are almost to a company led by leftists who support the Democrat Party, and the Democrat Party supports them and protects them. And these oligopolists, while crushing American freedom and different ideas and speech, tend to be working with these autocratic regimes, China and anybody else they can work. They'd love to work with Iran. They'd love to work with all these countries. They don't much care. This is a big problem. This isn't about free market capitalism. This has nothing to do with free market capitalism. They work the system. And the more centralized it is, the more power they have, given how much resources they have. When we come back, Peter, unbelievable book, Red Handed. I want to talk to you about the Bidens. That mess, that spectacle. We'll be right back.